It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear. And it absolutely will not stop. Ever. Until you are dead.
Welcome back to Thick and Critical. This is Wes. We've got more Jonathan Hickman breaking news this week. Last week, we found out that he was starting up his own Substack, 3 Worlds, 3 Moons kind of universe, bringing a handful of talented creators with him as far as a couple artists. I think Ewing Tini Howard. I think there was a couple more that was going with him. Some people thought this meant, it would be the end of his time with X-Men. I've certainly figured as well. He just hadn't made the announcement yet. Well, it is official. He's leaving X-Men at the end of Inferno. I've been waiting for this for quite some time. When I did my 10 basically predictions for 2021 as far as comic books, Jonathan Hickman leaving X-Men was one of them, because I had been hearing things behind the scenes. And you didn't only have to hear things behind the scene. It was kind of clear as day when you saw what was happening with the X-Men line, that Jonathan Hickman's voice was becoming quieter and quieter in the room, and other people were kind of taking a more vocal stance and really pushing the franchise and the direction of what Hickman's X-Men, where it was going. Like, he was the head of X, like in name only, but it was the Jordan White, like Tini Howard, Gerry Duggan show, maybe Vita Ayala, that were really pushing things. So this is not unexpected. In fact, I've been predicting this for quite some time, and we've made a few videos on it, that it's clear that Jonathan Hickman has left the building. Like, he hasn't been all that active. It hasn't felt like he's been writing X-Men for quite some time, although we did get a few issues here and there, specifically when he revisited the 2-part like Children of the Vault story. That was really good, and he followed that up with the Nimrod story. That was even better. That was it's probably the best X-Men issue that we've had all year. That one was really good. But otherwise, it hasn't really felt like Hickman's X-Men for quite some time. Everybody was excited about House of X Powers of 10. Where is this going? And Jonathan Hickman himself said he had very specific plans initially, that it was a 3-year plan, and he was in it for the long run. But I think that was his intention, but it just didn't happen, unfortunately. And he had a lot of stuff to say. This is specifically to Entertainment Weekly. We have not heard from Hickman for quite some time. He was doing a lot of interviews specifically to promote House of X Powers of 10. And when it was a big hit, he was doing a lot of interviews talking about what they were going to do and the talent he was bringing in. You could see he was really excited. He quit social media and just went essentially radio silent for like a year, maybe. There was one little interview for, Mutant Monday, whatever it is that they do at Adventures in Poor Taste, where they were talking about Jordan White, and he had some very general things to say, that, like, Jordan White's a nice guy. But it's been quite clear, and we heard from Jordan White himself, said that we've deviated from Jonathan Hickman's plan a long time ago, basically kind of confirming all that stuff. But Hickman himself has finally confirmed it. He is leaving X-Men, but apparently not Marvel. We'll get in all those specifics. He had a lot to say, and we'll go over every single word of it. This is from Hickman himself to Entertainment Weekly. Oh, plans have changed entirely. When I pitched the X-Men story I wanted to do, I pitched a very big, very broad 3-act, 3-event narrative, the first of which was House of X. And while this loosely worked as a 3-year plan, I told Marvel up front that I honestly had no idea how long the first part would last, because there was a lot of interesting ideas that I had seeded that other creators would want to play with. And so we left this rather open-ended. I was also pretty clear with all the writers that came into the office what the initial 3-act plan was, so no one would be surprised when it was time for the line to pivot. So he came in, he had a plan, generally speaking, he had an outline. We're going to start out with House of X Powers of 10. We're just going to have the second act, which will be predicated by an event. Then we'll have the third act. Of course, we've been through Dawn of X. We're in Reign of X now. So they have been doing phases, but it's been clear that it hasn't been Jonathan Hickman's phase in a while. It did feel at least like half of Ten of Swords was Jonathan Hickman. The half that was dealing with Arakko and Apocalypse and the original 4 Horsemen kind of getting back together, and this big contest that was going to take place to kind of reunite Arakko and Krakoa. And then we had the introduction of Amenth and all the things that the original 4 Horsemen including Apocalypse's wife Genesis, it all went through, and while them getting back together was a bit contentious. Now, a lot of that felt like Hickman, but all the rest of it was just hodgepodge nonsense, and that's why I don't think the event itself worked out. Nothing, and I mean nothing, about the Hellfire Gala felt like Hickman at all. Since it wasn't, and that's why you could see this Inferno event was coming up, and they had replaced him as the X-Men writer. Gerry Duggan is the new X-Men writer. We rebooted it to a new issue 1. They changed up they announced a formal team and all that nonsense, right? Apparently, they were not able to stick to this 3-act structure that he had initially planned out, and he was kind of vetoed. At least that's what it sounds like. And I think that was a huge mistake. Nobody in that X-Men office is the draw that Hickman is. No one's the architect that Hickman is. And be quite honest, and I'm a big fan of Ben Percy. I'm a big fan of Zeb Wells. I think they've been doing some really good stuff. None of the writers in there are of the quality of Hickman himself. They're not the architect that he is. They don't have the big picture thinking to execute things at the scale of House of X Powers of 10 and likely what he was wanting to do in the future. So he would have needed to have a lot of involvement. He goes on to talk about what happened when it was time to pivot to the second act. He says, however, I also knew that I was cooking with dynamite, and it was very possible that what I had written in House of X and the ideas contained within was not actually the first act of a 3-act story, but something that resonated more deeply and worked more like giant-sized X-Men, where it would represent a paradigm shift in the entire X-Men line for a prolonged period of time. So during the pandemic, when the time came for me to start pointing things towards writing the second act event, I asked everyone if they were ready for me to do that, and to a man, everyone wanted to stay in the first act. It was really interesting because I appreciated that House of X resonated with them to the extent that they didn't want it to end, but the reality was that I knew I would be leaving the line early. I can't believe anyone allowed for Hickman himself to be vetoed on his own story. All the sales generated by Gerry Duggan, Vita Ayala, Tini Howard, Ben Percy, Zeb Wells, and everyone working within that X-Men line were spiked, and they lasted longer than they should have. Specifically in the case of like a Leah Williams X Factor that was killed early. They were better than they should have been because they were associated with Jonathan Hickman. He was giving them street cred because people thought they were executing his vision, like they were working with him. I don't understand how they don't see that. The cachet and what he was bringing to the line, and the fact that he had this big act, this big idea that was ready to be executed, and they weren't willing to move forward with it. And I think Jordan White and his ineptitude, as well as C.B. Cebulski and some of the other leadership at Marvel, are going to rue the day that they allowed this to happen. That they allowed the head of X essentially to be, what did you call it, a mutiny? Was there a mutiny in the X office? It kind of sounds like it. And that's too bad. House of X Powers of 10 never should have been a giant-sized X-Men starting point for a prolonged event. These don't feel like the X-Men. A lot of people, rightfully so, when they're reading these stories, see these events in the mutants on Krakoa as villains because of their actions and kind of what they're doing. This should have been something very interesting that needed to be righted, needed clear end date, so you could get back to what the X-Men line truly represents. You can't go back in time, change it a little bit, but you can't have them be the villains forever. And we've seen Gerry Duggan kind of try to change that, but it feels like it's so far out of left field, it's not even funny. So I do think this is an enormous mistake. I don't think the other writers in there understand where they are in the pecking order in comparison to Jonathan Hickman. I know Gerry Duggan had a long run on Deadpool. Deadpool sales, weren't all that great, and that run sucked anyway. It wasn't very funny. I like Ben Percy. I think he's a really good writer. He's never had a career-defining run, unless you want to count maybe Green Arrow. In that case, the sales weren't very good. They were all receiving street cred from the geek community, from the X-Men community, by being associated with Jonathan Hickman and the creativity and the genius that went into House of X-Men Powers of 10. And the hubris involved to veto him and outvote him, as if they knew what the best thing to do for X-Men moving forward, is absolutely ridiculous. It should be mocked and scorned. Everyone should point at these people and say, ha ha, you deserve what's coming. Like, you deserve all of your sales to tank, and for everyone to rightfully, expose you for the frauds you are, because you're not Jonathan Hickman. That's what I think about that one. Now, we do know that Jonathan Hickman signed on with Substack with artists Mike Huddleston and Mike Del Mundo. He's bringing along, as I said, Ray M.V., Tini Howard. There's another writer, and they're going to be working on this shared universe. But he's not exclusive to Substack. He's not leaving Marvel for Substack in the way that James Tynion kind of left Batman. Well, you know what? Maybe it is similar. I think James Tynion's still going to be doing some work here and there for DC, but he's going to be, doing a Substack stuff. But he's also going to continue working with Marvel. At least that's what he says. Although I don't understand or have an idea where he would go, because you got to think, as Jonathan Hickman, it's really big picture stuff executed at the highest level, where like you can't miss an issue to be able to keep up with it, because he fills so much with information and things move so rapidly in his stories. And he's always world building. He's always giving you these pieces of information that kind of pay off, 15 months down the line and stuff like that. Think about this. He's worked on X-Men, Fantastic Four, and Avengers. So he can't do a team book anymore. He's done all the big teams. Where is he going to go? But this is what he had to say regarding his future with Marvel. Marvel doesn't really pay me to just write ongoing monthly books. There's an expectation for me to write bigger books that have wider reach than that. In an effort to facilitate both things, we've all spent the last 6 months or so reorienting the line, me creating Inferno to assist with that, and then bringing in some new writers to add to the existing team, and then plan for the next several years of X books. So after Inferno, I'll be leaving to go work on my next big Marvel thing, and starting in January, the X line will rocket forward, starting with a weekly series that leads into a very cool refocused line of books. Yes, it's taken us a little while to get everything assembled correctly, but the end result, everything that's coming after Inferno, is going to be pretty great. I doubt that. I have no faith in what's left of the Marvel office after Jonathan Hickman leaves. An X-Men office led by Gerry Duggan, Jordan White, Vita Ayala, Tini Howard, and like Leah Williams. Get out of here. So blind leading a blind there. Gerry Duggan's your big name. When has he ever sold a comic book because he's Gerry Duggan? When has he ever wrote a story that when you read it, you're like, this is a badass comic story? When you had to tell your friends, like, you have to read this comic that Gerry Duggan wrote. He's never done that. And he's been writing comics a long time. It's not like he's new at this. Nobody in the entire line, except for maybe Zeb Wells a little bit with Spider-Man, and I would say some of the stuff Ben Percy was doing with Nightwing before he was unceremoniously removed from that line, was really cool. You could see that Ben Percy was moving towards something, but he's never gotten to actually execute anything on that kind of level. And he's not the one writing X-Men anyway. He's doing Wolverine. Hopefully, he gets to stay on there and do some things, but even that one's lost a little bit of steam. It's felt like he's been kind of waiting for his exit strategy as well. I'll be surprised if in 6 months Ben Percy's still on the X-Men books. I think he can see the writing on the wall. He's a talented writer. You can probably see that this really isn't the environment for me anymore. Now, what could Jonathan Hickman work towards, in Marvel moving forward? He's going to be writing event books. I don't think he's going to be writing X-Men event books. He says Inferno's his end. And I think he's, he had something he wanted to execute and he wasn't allowed to. I don't think he's going to go back there as a favor and do them a favor and be like, here's some more Jonathan Hickman goodness so you can tout it as, part of your X-Men line after you overrode me when I had perfectly, had plans for the future that we needed to execute. Avengers right now is awful. Would I like to see Jonathan Hickman come in and help out with the Avengers? Yes, but I don't want him to be tainted with any of Jason Aaron's bullshit. I would hate for Jason Aaron to like lob something up for Hickman and have him try to dunk it. He'd throw it into the stands. Hickman's a good writer. He's not a miracle worker. He cannot take Jason Aaron's shit and turn it into chicken salad, right? That's a metaphor. That stuff doesn't really happen. You do the best you can, but he deserves better than that. Is he going to do a Fantastic Four event? Dan Slott's doing better on Fantastic Four, but he's still Dan Slott. Like, did you read Empire? Did you read Iron Man 2020? He's not exactly firing on all cylinders right now. I don't know what he's going to do. Maybe he'll get to do some stuff with Al Ewing in the cosmic universe. That would make a lot of sense. Al Ewing's actually a pretty decent writer. He actually knows how to set things up. He's working on Guardians of the Galaxy. He's got some other works right now. He's got Sword and some other things he's doing as far as cosmic. And he's got that Annihilation event that he's doing now. Maybe they could work together and do some really cool stuff. Otherwise, if Hickman's not doing the setup, I just don't see the execution even of the event book being good. Is he going to do Elseworld stuff? Perfect. Brilliant. I'm all in for that. Is he going to be doing these, some event books to really get some traction and get people excited for some Elseworld stuff that isn't taking place within the Marvel 616? I'm all for it. I don't see them spending top dollar for that. Even though if you look at DC's track record, it really works and it's worth it. Because if you get some of those classic stories, they might be in print for 30 years. Hickman's a good enough writer to do that. He's one of the few that they have. So I don't know what he's going to be doing, but he's not going to be working on X-Men. Will Jonathan Hickman's X-Men be the greatest what if in Marvel Comics history? Yeah, I think so. He clearly had something that he wanted to execute. He came in with House of X Powers of 10 like a force of nature. People were coming back in, and I heard it from multiple comic shop owners. People were coming back into the comic shop after being away for 10 years because they heard about it. And they wanted to read good X-Men again. It had been that long. Even though it was completely different and like nothing we'd really ever seen in X-Men before. But the quality was there. But they had to blow up the X-Men line. They went too big, too fast. Somehow they decided to let Jordan White get hold of the reins and let some of the lesser talents that were riding his coattails into the X-Men office somehow, get at the head of the table and override Jonathan Hickman. Completely ridiculous. Only Marvel could fuck something up like this, right? The biggest what if in Marvel Comics history. What if they let Jonathan Hickman do what he set out to do in the X-Men comics? Would we have had, 3 back-to-back, separated by 12-month events that are amongst the greatest X-Men events of all times? The further we get away from House of X and Powers of 10 and stay in this first phase, and the more these really talentless hacks like Tini Howard, Gerry Duggan, and others taint the waters of House of X, Powers of 10, the worse it feels now. And I do think in 20 years, people will go back and read House of X and Powers of 10, and they will appreciate it for how good it really is and how it was executed on such a high level. But if they continue on and they go and read the other shit that's associated with it, they're going to realize just how bad it got and how quickly it did, because they let so many talentless writers go in there and just change the entire direction of what Hickman was doing. It's too bad. I feel bad for Hickman. He clearly wanted to do something special here. He wasn't given that opportunity. I think what he said here to Entertainment Weekly was very gracious of him. He has enough cachet that he probably could have went out there and been a little bit more aggressive and more definitive about how he feels about this. But there's no way someone of Hickman's vision and capability is happy that he wasn't allowed to do what they paid him to come in to do. Now he's moving on. I say good for him. I'm glad you don't have to deal with all the miscreants and talentless hacks within the X-Men office right now. Go and do your own thing. Show everybody that they are riding your coattails the whole time and show them how it's done. Because the X-Men office, there's a couple series out there I'm still reading. But how do you get excited for any of this? We all bought into House of X and Powers of 10 for a reason. And now it's completely confirmed through not only Jordan White's words of a couple months back, but Jonathan Hickman's words right here, that it was all taken away from him, and that's not what we got. And it's felt like that for a very long time.